Hi, my name is Sahar, and I'd like to thank you for a very thought-provoking talk today. I would like to know what your thoughts are on what impact does an upbringing at home actually have on how women are perceived in Indian society. Because, you know, a lot of the time we spend with our mothers, grandmothers at home, and children role model. And what sort of an impact does that actually have on the perception of women in society?
Sahar, I think a lot, especially in a country like ours where the family is a very, very strong unit. You know, we've still not moved away from the family. And so I think that there's a very deep impact. But I don't think it's an impact on the way people are perceived in society. I think the impact is on how you perceive yourself. So if your parents have drilled it into your head that you're a woman and your fate in life is to get married and you mustn't do anything else, then it's very difficult to see yourself as something other than this knowledge that you have grown up with. In fact, in terms of perception, people may see you as something completely different because you're out in the public world and there are lots and lots of different people in the public world. I see this a lot with my students. I teach a course in a liberal arts university in Delhi, and that course is on feminism. And my students come from fairly upper middle class families who are quite traditional. And they are thrown into this liberal arts residential university where young men and young women are living in the same space. Their hormones are raging. Sexuality is rampant. It's in the air. It's around them. And all of them, this is the first time they become sexually active. And, you know, they're dealing with the baggage of what their parents have taught them, but what peer pressure is perceiving them to be, and how to deal with those two things. And it's so interesting to see the churning that's happening inside their minds and how that's leading to change. So I think upbringing has a lot to do with it. But I don't think it's in how you're perceived, but in how you see yourself.
And the lady who's sitting next to, did you also raise your hand, please?
Okay. My name is Virginia. I'm from the United States. And I don't know if this question is too personal for you, but as you were growing up, did you experience inequality in your home, in your family home?
You're asking me that question?
Yes, I am, yes.
Yes and no. My mother was a very strong feminist, and she brought up 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, in a fairly traditional household where my grandmother lived with us. So my grandmother was deeply unequal towards us. She would, at the dining table, feed my father first because he was her son, then my 2 brothers, then us, then herself, then then my mother. So we were deeply aware of the inequality. But my mother subverted it all by teaching us all kinds of tactics to trick my grandmother into giving us more food. So, and that was extremely liberating. And she also taught our brothers to do all the household work, to be feminist. She herself hated the kitchen, and she made us all believe that hating the kitchen for a woman was completely legitimate. So it was really interesting. And my grandmother, you know, she used to go to sleep in the afternoons. And at that time, traditional Punjabi women, they wore what I'm wearing, along with a thing called a salwar, which is like these loose trousers. And it used to have a string to hold it together. So the salwar's waistband was that big. And the string would gather it up so it looked elegant. And it was a very long string. She would go to sleep with the keys of a tin trunk in which she kept lots of food tied to her band. And my mother taught us how to quietly go undo it while she was sleeping, steal the food, fill our stomachs so that if she didn't feed us at the table, that was fine. And we did that really well. She knew, my grandmother got to know, but we did it. So yes, I grew up in a very egalitarian and yet non-egalitarian household.
Okay. Oh, okay. So maybe we can ask the male feminist over there, if you are.
Hello. Thank you for your insightful talk. Yeah, I'm Zikri from Malaysia, but I'm now based in Chiao Tung University. So you have given in the it would be great if you can actually expand on how economic fundamentalism actually happening in India as well. As you can see on how the BJP-led party right now under Narendra Modi, how he actually expanded on special economic zone, and there's a lot of accumulation by dispossession, especially with the dam project in India, where there's a lot of Dalit people, Adivasi was being displaced from their own context. So it would be great if you can actually expand your talk, and also if there is any feminist critique towards the economic fundamentalism that happens in India right now. Thank you.
Okay, you're asked me to do a whole other area. I deliberately stayed away from talking about Dalit experiences because I wasn't sure how much people would know and how much I would need to explain of that. And it's a fairly complicated explanation. But certainly there is a very strong feminist critique of the globalization model that India has followed since the 70s, since the 90s. Which has opened up the Indian economy to the entry of foreign capital, and which has brought into India a kind of, sweatshop labor, but not as you see it in many other, not as you see it in countries like the Philippines or Malaysia or elsewhere, that is not so much in factories as it is in people's homes, so where they are manufacturing smaller things. And this has added to women's work burden in very serious ways. And it's a very difficult issue to tackle, because what happens is that women are already putting, rural women, village women are already putting in long hours of work. Poor women are already putting in long hours of work in the home and in the field, etc. And now you bring in a sort of income generating activity into the home, which adds 2 more hours to your work, and which also adds an income. So nobody sees your oppression because they can only see the money. So there has been a big battle about this. It's also complicated by the fact that in urban areas, particularly Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, the entry of global capital, and particularly of the information technology industry, has created a lot of jobs for urban women. And these are extremely visible jobs. These are jobs that have taken women out of their homes and allowed them to earn a pretty decent income. So you might be critiquing globalization, but on the other side, you do have this aspect that you have to also look at. So there is a critique, there are lots of discussions about it, and feminists have not taken, many feminists are anti-capitalist. They may not be totally leftist, they may be centrist, whatever, but they have a critique of capital. So that has been happening in India. As far as the dam is concerned, as you know, the movement against the dam, its entire leadership is female, and they're fighting on behalf of poor, underprivileged, tribal, low-caste people. So the connections between the struggles of the poor and the underprivileged and the women's movement are very strong connections. There's a lot of points on which they ally.
Okay, please. Can we?
Thank you. I'm an Israeli living here in Taipei. When I finished my army in Israel, we all go and travel in India, and that was a long time ago. And I remember it was not very pleasant and easy to travel as a woman alone. I have students now, women students in Taiwan, who ask me about either traveling in India or studying in India, and they have the notion that it's very unsafe. What can you say about that? What can I tell them about that?
Tell them that they won't know till they try it. See, I think, it can be very unpleasant traveling alone in India as a woman, especially as a foreign woman. Why? Because because, I mean, I'm not making any excuses for it. I'm just trying to give you some context. Because of our colonial history, there is a way in which Indians and Indian men, but also Indian women, believe that the foreign woman is sexually available. Okay? So that is one thing. Secondly, there is no concept of privacy in India. We don't believe in that thing. It's not, I mean, it drives me around the bend, but people don't believe in it. So you could be traveling on a train in India, and the people sitting around you will ask you, so where are you going? Are you married? How long have you been married? How many children do you have? You don't have children? Why? You've been married 3 years, you don't have children? Don't you have sex with your husband? It just is like they feel they have a right to your, they're being friendly, but they feel they have a right to your life. Now, your concepts of privacy and our concepts of privacy completely apart. You will see this as very intrusive. Then it's your, I mean, if you're white, you're fair skin. If you're black, it's worse. Because we are, I'm ashamed to say it, but we are quite racist towards black Africans. We see ourselves, we have a sense of color. The Indians are obsessed with color. So everyone wants to be fair. And they see, therefore, black people as inferior to them, because in comparison with black Africans, Indian skins are brown, so there's a degree of fairness over there. So that is a terrible thing, but they see foreigners as falling into that class, and foreign women as, therefore, people they can easily target. This is not made easier by foreign women who don't know this culture and who behave freely. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But, for example, class is a big thing in India, right? So if I am going somewhere, I will not endorse it, but I have to learn to live by its rules and not cross those boundaries sometimes, because it complicates things. So if I'm going somewhere in a car and a driver is driving me and I stop on the way to eat something, I will not sit at the same table as the driver. I will eat and he will eat separately. And that's the protocol. Now, I remember traveling in India with a French friend of mine once, and she brought a bottle of whiskey for our driver, and she invited him to the bar at night. And the fellow was just so overwhelmed that he spent the whole night knocking on her door, because he thought it was an invitation. I kept telling her, Francoise, don't do this. You don't do it in India. So I think all societies have little cultural rules. If you can learn them and be a little careful, I think you're fine. But you have to always be aware of the dangers which might lie there. I mean, when I first traveled, you won't believe this, I used to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair. And when I first went to Frankfurt, I used to be so frightened of going home at night. I had to go to a far-off place. And the reason I was frightened was not because I thought German men were whatever, you know. I was frightened because I looked Indian. And I looked different. I was always dressed like an Indian. And I stood out like a sore thumb. And you don't want to attract attention to yourself. So I think there are some rules of travel that you have to face. And if you really look at the number of cases of women travelers being attacked in India, there will not be that many. So I don't think it's going to kill you or you will end up being assaulted, I think.
Okay, so we have only like 5 minutes left, so we're going to have our last question. Maybe from this side of the audience, maybe we need some
voices. Can we do one thing? Can we take the 2 or 3 questions and I'll just respond together? That maybe, and I'll try not to be a long response so that you can at least ask your question.
Okay. Okay, please, we can have, yes.
So hello, and I'm just a college student from Taipei actually. My question is that, so with many movements of feminists along the world, like they're not, no matter in Korea, USA, or in Taiwan, there are many objections, like negative comments. We can see it in social networks, like social media, like on these feminist achievements. So my question is that, in your life, have you met any objections or negative comments as a feminist, and how you deal with it? So I hope this answer can give a hint to all those feminists or who stands for feminism in Taiwan or in anywhere. So, thank you very much.
Many, but I live with them. It's okay.
Okay, so that's the answer. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so yeah.
There's one
Ah,
here.
okay.
Let's take both of those.
Okay. So maybe the last. I think we take the last question. Yeah.
I'm a Taipei native, and I'm a student at National Taiwan University. So what are your thoughts on education, especially gender education in schools? Will it help men and boys realize their privileges, even though an entirely different set of values, one that favors them, are being taught at home?
On education? Yeah, okay. Okay. Did you want to ask your question also?
Okay, so maybe we take the last. Sorry, the
So,
yeah, the last question.
my question is kind of similar. I'm a high school teacher, and I was wondering, because for the Me Too movement in America, I feel like I've seen a lot of men saying that these women are being too sensitive, and they were taking advantage of the situation by coming forward, because those were mostly allegations, not actually like things with proof. So I was wondering what you would how you would teach young girls when they're still teenagers, for example, to distinguish like what's the boundary of like sexual harassment and assault, and when it happens, how to deal with it. Because I feel like it's included in the sex ed, but still a lot of women, especially as Asian women, I feel like we've been taught to be obedient, polite, non-confrontational. So I'm just wondering how you would teach young girls to deal with situations like that. Thank you.
Okay, I think in response to your question, I think education is really important, and education needs to have a really central core or central element that sensitizes people to gender, diversity, inclusion, all of those things which are so much a part of our society. But unfortunately, we don't really have that, and governments, certainly our government does not spend enough on education. Whenever they have focused on educational programs for women, they have found women responding hugely and enthusiastically and coming out and learning, and you can see the difference it makes to their lives. Okay. On the Me Too campaign and young people, the question that you've asked, I think, the thing is that it is, for women of my generation, for example, we lived with sexual harassment. We never even thought of speaking out about it. Many times we didn't even recognize it as sexual harassment. Many of the women who've spoken out now are looking back on their lives and are able to recognize the anger that they have kept inside them and are speaking out about it. We have a very interesting version of Me Too in India, which is a young lawyer put on Facebook a list of people, and then others added to it. And it was a list of university professors, really well known, really well respected, who each of these young people was saying had sexually harassed one or other of them at university. But the list had no proof, nothing, just names. So it started a big discussion on this whole thing of saying, can you just put up names without proof, or should you not actually substantiate what you're saying? Because otherwise, how will those people be able to respond, and how can those cases be taken up officially unless you say this happened here and there? Big discussion. And then recently a second list has come up, which is a list also of young people. But it's now no longer their professors, it is their peers, the men that they work with, study with, etc. And it's got all the proof that you need. Email messages, SMSs, etc., etc. And there is a big discussion about that. What it shows to me really is how widespread sexual harassment is, how young people now understand it much better than we did at our, because there's so much discussion, and how it is necessary to deal with it. So universities are, for example, now doing all sorts of things. The university where I teach has just asked me and 2 other people if for the full year we will do 50 sexual harassment workshops with them for all their staff at every level, which means every 10 days you do a sensitization type of workshop. They want to try this as an experiment to see whether something like this can be made part of the agenda of education. And because educational institutions have a long life, they are well placed to implement that and then to see whether it has any result. So we'll see after a year or two of doing this whether it actually makes a difference.
Thank you very much. So I'm really sad to announce that we have to conclude the discussion session. I realize that there are still questions in queue, but we really have to call an end. So before that, Urvashi, would you like to make further remarks to your talk today to conclude the discussion?
Which answer? How do, oh.
She already answered that.
Yeah, no, I think that, okay, everybody, I think that if you were not challenged by a critique of what you're doing, by people who are opposed to what you're doing, by people who don't like what you're doing, then you become complacent about it. So I think it's important to accept those challenges. What I have learned over the years is not to be infuriated by them. So when I was young, I would get into a rage and a fury and fight and everything. I no longer do that. I try very hard to understand where that question is coming from, even if it's very critical of my point of view or what I believe, and respond to it with some calm. But you can do that when you're 66 years old. You can't do it when you're 20. And I just want to say thank you all for listening, for your patience and the curiosity that brought you here. It's really nice to be able to talk to you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to thank Urvashi for the insightful and inspiring talk and discussion. Thank you so much.